Egan, would you like to get us started?
Sure. Welcome to this evening's webinar, um, where we're going to be talking about the AAPPL assessment, a caregiver's webinar for language proficiency and testing. We are recording this website, and the video, as well as the slides, will be available on the K to 5 Teaching and Learning webpage, which is down at the bottom here. And we'll be sharing that, Barbara, and other methods for people to access it as well, right?
Correct. It will be shared in our next website. I'm sorry, in our next newsletter.
Great, very good.
So I am Barbara Barnett, and I am the very proud and happy static K-5 World Languages Department head here in Wellesley Public Schools. And I'm here tonight with
Tim Egan, and I'm the 6 to 12 World Languages Department head. Barbara and I collaborate very closely on all of our program design, instructional choices, and assessment practices. And we're very glad this evening to be talking to people about the program and about our external proficiency assessment. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head.
But if you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. Those are very wise words by Nelson Mandela.
And we thought a quote like this is an appropriate place to start because it talks to our, I think, the underpinnings of why we believe so strongly in a robust world languages program and language experience for our kids in the Wellesley Public Schools.
Now, language learning is a journey. It's not a one and done. It takes time. It's a process that here in Wellesley we are very lucky to have. We're very lucky that Bates, Fisk, Hardy, Honeywell, Schofield, Sprague, and now our fourth graders, some did start at Upham. They start their journey that will eventually lead to a profile of a graduate and hopefully to the seal of literacy, something that is very, very important for our students. But having a robust elementary program leads them to a language learning that will lead them in a proficiency journey because all learners have the right to access high quality language instruction, regardless of learning needs, achievement levels, race, ethnic origin, socioeconomic status, home language, or future academic goals at the earliest age possible.
So, our agenda for this evening first, what has our journey been throughout the past, today, and where we're going in the future?
And one of the most important questions, what is proficiency? What is performance versus proficiency?
Then we'll talk about why we do this external assessment and why is it necessary to measure progress in this way, because we have classroom testing.
What is the APPL? What is the actual assessment of performance towards proficiency in languages?
What does the kids' experience look like? What does it look like for our multilinguals at the fourth grade and the other grades in which we do the assessment?
Then once we do take the test, what are the results? How are we intending to use the score reports?
And then finally, we will wrap up and we'll have an opportunity to take questions from participants. So, our language journey, past, present, and future, it all started way back in 2015 when we had the two pilot schools where we began our program.
Which means our current fourth graders were still babies. They were about 1 year old. They were toddlers. They were still beginning, but we here at Wellesley were working very hard to get our program started, and we were developing a very robust program so our current fourth graders were ready to start their language journey. So as you can see here in our chart, we demonstrate a K-12 look of what our program looks like. We started back in 15-16. We started with a pilot school in only two schools, but currently our fourth graders 24-25 have have been able to enjoy a K-5 programming. Now, They did start as a kindergartner with a shorter experience because they had the pandemic year where they experienced once a week. But first through fourth grade, they have experienced 3 times a week for 30 minutes.
And our first K-8 cohort is
Mhm.
now in 11th grade, which is really exciting.
As we develop our curriculum, we make sure we anchor our curriculum in intercultural communication. Here we're sharing with you our essential questions as we develop our curriculum. For how do we learn in Spanish class? That's usually how we start our year, anchoring that into our social emotional learning. But we also embed our intercultural communication, meaning how are we connected to a particular country? How are we connected to other places around the world? And we also tackle questions of how are celebrations important for families? How does the weather and the climate affect our lives? But essentially, how are we connecting to somewhere else around the world? Fourth graders started their year right back, Mr. Egan. Fourth graders started their year on how do we go to and learn in school? How are we connected to Cuba? How do I spend my day? How are we connected to República Dominicana? Currently, they're how to do my senses help me perceive the world around me? How are we connected to Puerto Rico? And they're going to end their year with how do I describe myself? And how are we connected to El Salvador? And I can guarantee you they're going to have a very exciting fifth grade experience where they will start talking about the Hispanic community in the United States and expanding with other areas around the world, but all center about themselves, about how are they unique and bringing everything together about their experiences here in the Wellesley Public Schools Spanish program.
So you'll see that as students move from 5th grade into 6th grade, you're going to see some repetition of the essential questions, whether students are continuing with Spanish or they're choosing another language. So we see the same essential question, what makes me unique? What makes me similar to others? But as students progress through their proficiency, they look at each of these essential questions with a different set of skills, with building skills, with new language functions and new language structures. So we've very intentionally woven through similar essential questions and similar content with this progression that you'll see throughout our conversation this evening. When we move to the high school, you see the same essential question again. Again, we're building and building and building. So students aren't doing the same unit, multiple grade levels. They're looking at the same question, understanding how to think differently about it. We have units where students are talking about social media and asking questions about technology. Does it connect us or separate us? In what ways does it maybe do both of those things? We look at being an adult and taking care of the environment. What does it mean to live a healthy lifestyle? And at the high school, we're more focused on moving students towards the seal of biliteracy in their senior year.
Now, throughout their experiences, we're assessing their progress. We obviously have in house assessments, we have benchmark assessments that are shared across all the schools. But in fourth grade, we have an outside assessment. We have the Apple test, where they will be assessing interpersonal listening and interpersonal speaking. Now, it's very important if you wish to go and do some research and find out more about this assessment, that there are different types of this assessment. There's Form A, Form B, but for the elementary school, we do take the Form E, which is strictly designed for elementary schooling.
Then, when students move to 8th grade, we do Form A. And Form A, where Form E, the elementary form, only tests interpersonal listening and speaking, Form A tests all the modes of communication, uh, interpersonal, presentational, and interpretive. with all those four language skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, because starting in middle school, there's an intentional shift towards a stronger focus on reading and writing skills. And so students also take a similar assessment if they're studying Latin in middle school. It's called the ALIRA, and it's an assessment of reading comprehension in Latin. So they do that test form A in grade 8, and then when they get to what we call year 3 course, which essentially is 10th graders, but sometimes we have ninth or 11th graders or seniors in a year 3 course. We do test form B in those languages. And so we'll show you a little bit down the road how there's some differences in each of these levels of test forms. So what is proficiency? We're going to talk a little bit about performance versus proficiency. So, Senora Barnett, my fourth grader is taking Spanish, and we're going to Guatemala this summer. And I want to know is how much is my fourth grader going to be able to communicate for some of the family members who don't speak Spanish if they need help in a restaurant or getting a taxi and things like that?
Now, one thing I'm going to guarantee you is that your fourth grader, oh, by the way, quick question, is your fourth grader has been with us since kindergarten
Since kindergarten.
and has been with us the entire time?
Yes.
Now, one thing I want to guarantee you is that your fourth grader will not be your translating guide. Your fourth grader will not be your tourist guide. He's not going to be your translator at all times. That is impossible. Those are expectations that are not realistic, and that is not possible to happen. And I'm going to explain you why with an example. So here we have Jason Tatum. We all know him as a great scorer for the Boston Celtics. Now, Jason Tatum is a great basketball player. Jason Tatum has been playing basketball for a very long time. But when Jason Tatum was playing basketball at the Y, when Jason Tatum was playing in Memphis, when Jason Tatum was playing at Duke, he went through different processes to become a better basketball player. He played for many years before he became a Boston Celtic. But when he was back in the Y, when he was back in his minor league, when he's with his teammates or when he was playing in Little League, when he was playing with his friends at school, he was not proficient enough to be able to play with the Celtics, meaning he could not be translating in your trip to Guatemala. That was is very unrealistic to set those expectations because he was not exposed enough to basketball time, to court time, to be able to play at a Celtics time, at a Celtics level. So when we see a picture of Jason Tatum now having all those high scores, being such a good scorer, it is impossible for him to backtrack when he was little to have those expectations for him. So going back to your question, Tim, we need to set realistic expectations when we talk about our students, our learners, that, oh, they have been taking Spanish since kindergartner. We're going on a trip to Guatemala. Of course, they can have and be my translator. Well, those are unrealistic expectations. Yes, they have been taking Spanish since fourth grade, but they have only been taking Spanish for 3 times a week for 30 minutes. So the amount of exposure is very limited in comparison to the years of time and exposure. So, what can a fourth grader do for that amount of time and celebrate of what they can actually do? What about John Williams?
So similarly, when John Williams was a young child, he was interested in music and he practiced and he had a lot of skills, but he didn't have the skill level to be the conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Those grow over time. And just like language proficiency develops over time, uh, all of these kinds of proficiencies, whether they're in athletics or performing arts, develop over time.
So then, Mr. Egan, what is the difference between proficiency and performance? Can you tell me about proficiency?
Sure. So proficiency is a way of measuring real world language skills, what we can do outside of the classroom in things that are not connected to our curriculum. So the formal description is proficiency is what individuals can do with language in terms of speaking, writing, listening, and reading in real world situations in a spontaneous and non-rehearsed contexts. So, Barbara, how does that differ? How does proficiency differ from performance?
So performance, it's unlike proficiency. Performance, it's what happens in our classroom. So while proficiency is what happening in real world, performance is the ability to use language in very limited and controlled situations, such as the classroom or control situation based exchange. So then when you look at the picture that Mr. This picture is what is happening at Bates, is what happening at Fisk, at Hardy, at Honeywell, at Schofield, at Sprague, is all, and then eventually at the middle school, at the high school, is all those tasks and activities and performances that are happening in the classroom is what we can control for our students. It's not what is happening in the trip to Guatemala. It's not what is happening when they go to a restaurant, but it's all those experiences that we can provide for students so then they can become more proficient when they go to Guatemala, when they go to the restaurant. So, in order to do that, we make sure to provide experiences for students that they can become more proficient. So, for example, here you have a proficiency ladder that we have used for students throughout their journey when they start here at the elementary school. So, we try to create more independent learners so they can experience to chunk more their language so they can provide us more. If you look at this ladder, for example, they start at the bottom with I don't know it yet. Then they will want us to give us a word. They will want us to give us a phrase. Then they want us to give us a complete sentence. Then eventually details. And then with a question. The importance about this ladder where they start giving us more and more and more is that they get used to being independent about the language and then they start becoming more responsible for each other to being more asking each other to provide more language of each other, so being accountable for saying, hey, that was just a one word, why don't you try a phrase? So it's pushing to level up more their language skills.
A story that I like to tell when I talk to people about language proficiency is the time I was in a middle school French classroom. I happened to be observing an interpersonal communication activity, students sitting in small groups talking to each other. And then I saw one student doing this. I thought, I don't know what's happening there. Then I saw other students doing it and understood they're doing something that has to do with the classroom, but I didn't understand what it was. So I asked the teacher afterwards, and she said, oh, one day we were doing interpersonal practice, and they said, our fifth grade teacher did this to teach us to help our classmate, to encourage our classmate to say more. And so what I was observing was students encouraging their group members to level up their language skills, which is precisely what we want. This is the kind of learning we want them to take away, helping, thinking about their own leveling up and helping their classmates to level up as well.
And what is extremely important, as we discussed earlier, is the definitions and the difference between performance tasks and proficiency tasks, is that we need to provide them opportunities in the classroom that talk about other sources that are not related to what we're currently discussing in a unit. So, for example, we have established activities that are called ¿Qué prefieres? What do you prefer? These activities or tasks do not are not part of the unit, and they're intentionally done to motivate students in a very fun, creative way because they bring vocabulary that we might necessarily not discuss, but they do it in a silly way. So it's very creative for students, where we will bring, for example, what do you prefer? Having the nose of a pig or having the ears of an elephant? Now, this vocabulary they will not necessarily cover. There might not be part of the unit that they're currently studying, but it's having that creativity part, that fun part of the language where they get to have this what do I really want to do? I don't know. So it's not only having the vocabulary, but then explaining why they will want that. Chances are that they do not know all the words that they want to explain why they want to have the nose of a pig versus the elephant ears, but they have to use the little Spanish that they know to explain the rationale why they want that. The reason that is important is because they have to learn to navigate these explanations with what they know. And the reason also this is important is because it does not relate to the current unit. Consequently, they're using tasks that are not performance. They're not part of the unit. They're not studying for a test. They're studying part of other things that are more world related and not performative.
And a couple of threads that are really important throughout our program design: ambiguity and creativity. We need to build in our learners we might call it a tolerance for ambiguity, really an embracing of ambiguity, because language, it can be ambiguous. When we're learning how to communicate in the classroom and then we go outside of the classroom, if all we've done is memorized a restaurant dialogue or a dialogue for directions to the train station, when we ask that question, the other person we're speaking to on the streets in San Juan doesn't know the other half of the dialogue. And so we need to build this capacity in our learners to navigate things that feel ambiguous and to be able to create on the spot without having all of the resources in front of them.
Now, here you have pictures of students still creating with the language in other fun, creative ways. And very importantly, they're collaborating with each other. Um, Collaboration is extremely important because they get to use the language with each other. Um, from using puzzles to talk about the language, to creating skits to present their language, to using their iPads to use tasks that where they can manipulate the language. So it's very important that we give them many different tools and ways to access the language. So it's not the old-fashioned way of matching vocabulary, or as we when I learned English, conjugating verbs that did me pretty much no good when I was learning. So it's exposing students to language in very different creative ways. That's something that is very important is ensuring that students have a takeaway that they can learn the language. Not so much that only few students can learn the language, but every student can learn a language. So we have created this self-reflection of where we start the year this way, halfway through the year, and at the end of the year, we make sure we finish this way as well. That I am a great Spanish learner, and we check off the boxes to make sure that we are instilling these habits that I can learn Spanish because I can learn Spanish. Bottom line, I can learn any language because I am curious and open minded about other cultures. I use my whole body to help figure it out Spanish. I stay calm when I don't understand everything right away. I try using Spanish in and out of class. I get creative and playful with the language. I am okay when making mistakes. Mistakes show that I am learning. I have the power of not yet. I will get there with time. I don't give up, even when it's tough. I am patient. I know that learning a language takes time, and I have fun learning Spanish. And at the end, they get to write their own way of how they are a great Spanish learner.
And at the middle school level, students continue with that kind of goal setting and understanding, reflecting about being a language learner with this idea of being an epic language learner. This year, I will be an epic language learner. They set goals for themselves, reflecting on the path to proficiency and the steps that it takes along the way. So students become very skilled in talking about language proficiency and understanding what does it mean to be a novice mid learner of language? What does it mean to be striving towards intermediate high? And how do we make those assessments for ourselves in making judgments and trying to move our language learning forward? And you see in this last child on the bottom row here had the goal of being able to order food in a cafe in French, Gaelic, and English, right? So many of our learners are already multilingual before they come into our language classroom.
So, why do we assess? Is it necessary to measure progress? And how do we measure proficiency? Why do we do it and how do we do it? Well, first and foremost, we do have some guidelines, right? We have to follow these guidelines in order to help us how to measure the language. And our students at the elementary level, when they are non-native speakers or heritage speakers, they start at what we call the novice. Novice are I can communicate minimally, which is how I'm speaking English right now, minimally with formulaic and rote utterances, lists, and phrases. So they're pretty much at the word level. So going back to the question that Mr. Egan asked earlier about the trip to Guatemala, that's what a novice student is. That's what a novice speaker is. And it takes X amount of hours in order to move from the novice to the intermediate. It takes time. It takes time in order to progress from that level to the other. However, what is very important to know that in order to, even those students that are the word level, we expect them to provide us more because there are instances where they will give us a sentence levels performance, but not at all times. So at the most times they're at the word level, and at times they give us sentence level. And very importantly, we as teachers are always giving them more because we want to model at a sentence level and a paragraph level at all times.
If we want students to achieve higher levels, we're always teaching just beyond their proficiency level. And novice students, so when we're teaching novice students, we're using intermediate language, and something that we can't always see or measure is their heads become really filled with language and understanding that they can't quite yet express. And oftentimes we see come sixth, seventh grade that a lot of that ability to express all of that language that's been stored in their heads really starts to come out. And it's a very exciting process to watch. So when we think about what does it look like for a K to 12 language program in terms of what real world skills learners develop? So you can see from this chart from AAPPL, our national association, our professional association for languages, that if we have a strong K to 12 program, we can expect students to be in the advanced range by the time they finish their senior year. And here's a chart that ACTFL provides of some of the kinds of jobs that students might have with different levels of proficiency. So you see in the novice range at the bottom, there are no jobs that a student could perform with novice level skills. But once they reach that intermediate mid range, they could be successfully be a cashier or sales clerk or receptionist using their language skills in that second or third or in some cases, fourth language. As they move into intermediate high, they might be able to do a job like a firefighter. And as they go higher and higher, and if the advanced, if we look at advanced high, they could have jobs like physician, financial advisor, all kinds of other jobs. So this is on a continuum, and we're always striving to move our students higher and higher. So why do we assess proficiency?
So, proficiency helps us to identify the strengths and weaknesses in language skills. Very importantly, help us to set goals in regards to performance targets. It helps us measure the progress towards those goals against the standards. It helps us provide feedback to the learners, to ourselves, the educators, to us, the program leaders, and more importantly to you, the caregivers, through the standard-based report cards. It helps us inform the instruction and set academic milestones. And bottom line, it's good for improve the learning.
So let's talk about what the APPL is. So it stands for Actful Assessment of Performance Toward Proficiency in Language. That's certainly a mouthful, but let's look at what it looks like in practice.
So, what is the apple for the elementary? I had mentioned before that the elementary will be taking the Form E, and the Form E assesses the interpersonal listening and interpersonal speaking. This test will be taken during the Spanish class. It will take two classes. We divide the test in two in order because Spanish classes take 30 minutes. So we divide the test in two to make it more manageable for students. And since they're using their iPads, we want to make sure that they have enough time to put them on and what have you. Their test will be during the week of March 17th. Students will be using their iPads, headphones will be provided, and we will make sure and is ensured that accommodations will be followed. We submit all these accommodations beforehand, so the tests are ready. Each test is individualized for students who do need accommodations.
Those accommodations are built right into their username, and
Mhm,
so they're automated for students. So it's completely seamless, and the students don't even see that there's
mhm,
something in
mhm.
terms of accommodation on their test.
Now, you will notice that in your standard-based report cards, we do have strand called interpersonal communication, which goes hand in hand to this particular test because we are assessing interpersonal communication because this particular assessment is for interpersonal listening and interpersonal speaking.
As we move into the middle school and the high school level, we continue with those skills of the modes of communication, interpretive, interpersonal, presentational, as well as intercultural communication. We also have this concept of communities as part of our state and national standards. This is the rubric that we begin using starting in middle school. Now, the middle school rubric is the same content. It looks a little bit different than this visually because we want to make sure that for middle school learners, it's student-friendly language, and this we felt might be a little bit overwhelming to our sixth and seventh graders, but it's the same content, and so we're carefully planned out. And really, when we unpack these are the same skills that you see at the elementary level. They're worded at the elementary level in a way that's elementary student friendly. So when we look at what we do for grade 8, we're now in Form A. We do it in the same way during the world language classes during the month of April. Students at the middle school have iPads just like they do at the elementary level. Same situation with uploading accommodations to Language Testing International, and those are all automated. And we do have headphones for students. We also have purchased this year dividers that students will put up on their desk area where we can spread them out a little bit, and then that gives them a little bit more. It buffers the sound from other students a little bit more, makes it a little more comfortable for them. Also gives them a little bit of personal space so they don't feel like their neighbor's right there. And then at the high school, and essentially the year three classes, we use the Form B. And it's the same routine, except that we do it throughout the year. We start our testing in November, and then we do some more in February, and we wrap up in April. So, what's the kids' experience look like, particularly for our fourth graders?
So this is always very interesting to see how well students adapt to this assessment. Is usually us adults who get very worried about how students are going to react to these assessments, particularly an assessment that takes place using in a device, using their iPad. They're so proficient with these electronics that they adapt very, very well. The assessment resembles a lot of things that they are very used to in the classroom, so there's just nothing new to them. And we do take a demonstration test. They do take a demo to get used to this assessment. So they're able to practice what this interpersonal listening and interpersonal speaking looks like before they actually take the assessment. What is very important to us is that they don't get worried about the logistics of the test. So we want to make sure that when they actually take the assessment, we're measuring their proficiency skills and not being worried about the logistical things of the test. The test has about 12 to 15 questions, and it takes about 35 minutes to complete the assessment because it does take about 35 minutes, but because our classes are 30 minutes, by the time the iPads are taken out and stored away and the dividers are put on, that's why we do divide the assessment in order to make it more manageable and you know, a less of a stressful environment for them. That's why it is divided into 2 days for them. The way the assessment is created, the experience is it resembles a conversation. It is very important to point out that this is not a live conversation. This is a video that has been pre-recorded, but the way the video is done, it looks like the person is talking to you, and the person pauses long enough to give you a way to answer the questions the person is asking you. The students do have an opportunity to replay the question. And then once a question has been posted, because it's an interpersonal conversation, they will have an opportunity to answer the question and perhaps ask a question back. That's part of an interpersonal, is the back and forth. Um, so they will ask and answer and ask the questions that are provided to them. But it's a pre-recorded video. It's not a live conversation. Now, the results. How are we intending to use this score and these reports?
So when we look at the proficiency scale, we see that novice is rated from N1 through N4, intermediate I1 through 5, and then advanced for this apple goes only to A1. And so for the elementary form E and the middle school form A, that test only measures through that high level of intermediate mid I4. The test form B doesn't measure anything below novice high, which is that N4, and it measures all the way into the advanced level. And so that's why we very purposefully have the different level tests at each of those grade levels. A and E for the elementary and middle, and B for the 10th graders. And then again, for seniors who are doing the seal of biliteracy. One of the other important reasons that we haven't mentioned is for students who are going to be applying for the seal of biliteracy, they will have seen this AAPPL assessment in grade 4, grade 8, and grade 10, and now will be able to do it, and they'll be very familiar with the format of the testing, which of course helps them with their score. This is what a score report looks like, and this is an actual score report from an individual who took the assessment as a 10th grader a couple of years ago. And you see that this student that we're hoping our 10th graders score in the I2 to I3 range. And you see that this student scored I4 in a couple of places, I2 and I3. It gives a score description as well as strategies for how to level up language performance. And so students will get these scores near the end of the year when we've done all of the testing, and we'll print them out and be able to give them to students' teachers who will be able to give them to students to take home. And then we, of course, have the scores with us in a report. This is just another view of what it looks like from the novice level, the N1 to N4 score report. I believe, Barbara, this is for the Form E score report that you get, right?
That is correct. And that one gives you more details of what an N1, N2, N3, N4, because our students are, that's where they live, that's where they spend their time as that at the novice range. Although we have had students who have scored in the intermediate. But this is where they're going to be at for the most part.
So that brings us to the important question, how do we use the results? Noting that sometimes we see elementary students scored intermediate. Sometimes we see 10th graders who are already qualifying for the seal of biliteracy.
Now, it's very important that these scores, these results, are help us design benchmark assessments. They help us provide interventions when needed. They help us guide program review and plan for the future. And what is really, really, really helpful is that we purposefully give this assessment to fourth graders because we can use these results to impact our fifth grader curriculum. It helps us make any adjustments that we need for fifth grade before we send these great multilingual proficient Spanish learners before they go to the middle school in order for them to set goals for grades 6 to 12. But what is very, 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 very crucial is that these scores, Mr. Egan, what about it?
That
Are
they're not for giving grades to students. These are not for the purpose of anything other than what we've described here and to help students improve their language learning. But we don't believe it would be appropriate to use these to give students a grade. We might use it for, well, we do use it for looking at our proficiency targets that we set for different grade levels and deciding is it appropriate at this point to shift our proficiency target, say in sixth grade, to a higher level of proficiency based on what we're seeing, what trends we're seeing in the fourth grade scores? So much like we have seen throughout the years, English and math teachers use MCAS scores to inform instructional decisions and program design. That's our goal because we don't have um, a state developed assessment. The state of Massachusetts, for the seal of biliteracy, has approved this AAPPL assessment and the ALIRA assessment, and so we use that straight through our programming. So now we can think about wrapping up with a few final thoughts.
so learning another language is not only learning different words for the same thing, but learning another way to think about things. And that's extremely important as we differentiate between the performance and proficiency. Is giving students one, two, three different lenses to look at the same thing in different ways. And that's why it is so beautiful that Wellesley Public Schools start our students at Bates, Fisk, Hardy, Honeywell, Schofield, Sprague, and at one point at Upham in the path to proficiency with a world language program.
And as we think about students in their senior year and we think about the profile of a graduate, we want to develop student agency and we want to see students applying for the seal of biliteracy, which is a recognition that goes on their diploma as well as their transcript. It's actually written into Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 69, Section 1D is the section that talks about language um, learning. And uh, it's I think it's really important to understand that there are now 12 state universities and community colleges in Massachusetts that recognize the seal of biliteracy for either credit or placement. And we're starting to see more colleges and universities across the country. When students get their certificate, there's a code on there. So, for example, if a student's applying for an internship at college and that internship, say it's an organization that does work in Germany, and the student can say, well, hey, I did the seal of biliteracy as a high school senior. Here's my score, and here's the code that so that the internship organization can look up that code and get a verified score from Language Testing International, and that can give a student an edge in obtaining an internship in college.
So this is the time where we will take your questions. There is in the bottom part of the presentation, there is a little bubble with a question mark. If you will like, it's called a Q&A. If you would like to post your questions, we will gladly answer your questions here live. But there's also our email address here. If you have questions that come up later on, we will make sure to answer your questions as well. But for now, we will love to answer your questions
And if
that you
you're
have for
not
us.
sure, I don't know what it looks like on the participant screen, but for me as the presenter, if I look at all of those tools, there's the three dots that say more at the end, and that's where I'm able to find the Q&A. And I'm not sure if it's the same on the participant screen or not.
But we have certainly enjoyed having you here. We will wait a couple minutes to make sure that we answer your questions. Our emails are here. We can answer your questions as well later on. Um, this webinar has been recorded, so we will be posting this in the middle school website, but we will also will make this recording available in our next newsletter, so you will be able to see it as well.
So it looks like maybe we don't have any questions
We
currently.
don't.
Again, please feel free to email either of us or both of us to ask any questions that you might have that come up for you in the future.